Well, welcome back, everybody. We took our break somewhere in the middle of May. Yeah, about about 4 months ago, huh?
End of May.
Huh?
End of May.
End of May. He said
End of May. Yeah, a little over 3 months. For me, the time has gone very quickly. I don't know about you. Good to be back here at Berkeley Buddhist Monastery. Really good not to have to wear a mask to talk. So we have social distance of, looks like 12 feet from the people who are here in the room. Mostly the residents of the Berkeley Buddhist Monastery. We're still not open to the general public, are we?
No.
No.
Not yet. Not yet.
Not yet. It'll be coming. Some of you have become so addicted to this computerized streaming version, you won't even come back anymore. So we'll have to entice you with something more than Dharma. Perhaps we'll have snacks at the end of lecture or something that you can't get online. We're going to continue to do the Avatamsaka Sutra. I'm probably overlapping a bit from where I left off. I'm not sure, but in the section we're looking at, which is chapter 9, we've retranslated as luminous awakening. And where I'm going to start tonight is the last two verses, and in my text it looks like page 26, just before we start with another intro at that time, Light Path Through 100 Worlds. Before that section, there's two verses here, and we may get to both of them tonight, we may not, but we will try. Everybody have that place?
You said page 26?
I say it's page 26. The English is, it's a second reference to the lion's roar, but then brilliance has no peer, excelling all in the world,
Yeah.
so
page
forth.
24, 25.
What page?
24, 25.
24, 25. And the text I have is 26.
Okay.
So, as is our practice, and I have the residents here at the monastery are much more skilled in Chinese than I am. So I will say it quietly and they can say it loudly. We're going to recite, say the Chinese. These, of course, are made up of 5-character, 4-line verses. So there's a rhythm and there's a meter to it that is lost in the English, and I'm going to talk about that a little tonight, more about translation. And the format, again, for those of you who are really new, we start at 7:30 and we do a sitting meditation, quiet sitting meditation from 7:30 to 8:15. 8:15 to 9 o'clock, we look into and investigate and to some extent tweak the translation of this sutra. So it's interactive. Those who are watching online can sort of get a feel for what we're doing and then think about how would be best to translate this Chinese text into English. Those of you who want to go beyond English would go to the next level. What would it be like to translate Chinese to Spanish or to French or to German or to Poland or to Canadian? Oh, I'm sorry. Languages, and also to translate it with a modern, how shall I say it, with a modern purchase, so that it's not only good English, but it can resonate with a contemporary sensibility. You can translate something from Chinese to English and you can go into what we call Victorian English, which would be correct English, but it's really not vernacular now. You could translate it into Shakespearean English if you had that ability. It still might resonate, but it wouldn't go for now. And that's why these texts over time have to be retranslated again and again and again. And the challenge is, how do you translate it and keep the original intent? This is very critical, because sometimes the translation over time can be so fluid in the target language that it can lose its original thrust. And so you end up with something that sounds very smooth in English, but doesn't have the corresponding effect it should. And I want to talk about this again tonight. So let's just start with slowly doing the Chinese verse, which is 或见, right?
Yeah, 或见
或见狮子火，微光最殊特，超一切世间，神通力无等. Okay, and I will read the translation I'm assuming you all have, and then we'll look at it a little more. The text in English, initial translation: perhaps someone sees him sounding the lion's roar. His awesome brilliance has no peer, excelling all in the world. The power of his spiritual penetrations is unequaled. Now, if we look at, again, if you've sort of lost where we are, this whole section of verses starts out with Manjushri Bodhisattva in this assembly, and it's not just one, it's many Manjushris, so you're going to have to stretch your mind a little bit here, because Manjushri is not one single being. But he's describing then the state and the understanding and the manifestations of Buddhas, enlightened beings. And so the first verse begins, what the Buddhas understand. And then it quickly goes into how the Buddhas appear. So the second verse, the third verse, the fourth verse, the fifth verse, the sixth, the seventh, the eighth, the ninth, the 10th, where we are tonight, all of them have in there this, let's see, jian, which is he sees. So the first one say, the Buddhas understand, this is their state. But then the whole series of verses that follows, how the Buddha is seen by bodhisattvas, arhats, and I would say by extension, living beings in general. So this is really getting into the appearance that is coming off an enlightened being, how he's or she is seen. Now, this is tricky. One reason, let me say this, is first of all, this jian is used throughout the teaching, and I'm particularly referring to this passage in the Platform Sutra. This is a kind of scene that isn't like watching TV, okay? And it's not like the scene you have when you go sightseeing. This jian, in the Prajnaheart Sutra, it's called Jiao Jian, and it's a lumen scene. It's a scene that penetrates, that sees through. So that's why if you don't cultivate and you don't have the beginning of gathering your light back, you will just have jian, but you won't have Jiao Jian. You won't have a lumined, awakened scene. Now this isn't quite shantong, spiritual penetrations yet, but it's the beginning along a continuum of expanding consciousness, and when consciousness is expanded and breaks through all attachments, there is perfect seeing. There's perfect, I won't call it vision because that's a mistake with this sort of thing. It's perfect seeing. In other words, you actually penetrate and see the nature of reality. At that point, how an enlightened being looks to you is very different than when you looked upon an enlightened being if you had the opportunity and you weren't seen that way. That's why even in the Buddha's time, you can see people were walking by the Buddha, were in the presence of the Buddha, and didn't see anything special. And yet other people who were cultivating, and people who cultivated very deeply, one glance could cause them to break out in joy or tears. It's such a profound experience of seeing something. So that's why the text says, and this is very important, thus in the same place and at the same time, there can be differences in jian, seen, and hearing. Thus, in the same place at the same time, there can be differences in seeing and hearing. And that's why we have different impressions and even different understandings of what the Buddha said, what the Buddha manifested, what the Buddha taught. For example, in the Vajra Sutra, you have Subhuti seeing something that he never saw before, even though he had watched the Buddha for many days, many weeks, many months, many years. The Buddha goes on his alms rounds, he comes back, he washes his feet, he calms himself after eating and sits, and Subhuti has this profound, almost awakening as to what the Buddha was really all about. He saw something. That's because Subhuti was cultivating. Nobody else in that assembly at that time had quite the same experience, even though they were seeing and hearing the same thing. So this is critical. This jin has to do with a reciprocal manifestation of a certain appearance that an enlightened being has, but equally and probably critically important is the light we bring to see that. This is really, really quite interesting what's going on. All these teachings are non-dual. Non-dual at this level means there is a relationship between an enlightened being and an ordinary being. And that relationship can be very distant, almost non-existent, or it can be very close, depending on the affinities that you have through your cultivation with enlightened beings. So the more you cultivate, the more light you return, the more you see. The more you see, the more you want to cultivate. Because correspondingly, when the Buddha manifests his appearance, which are awesome virtue and to the point of inspirational bodhicitta, causing you to resolve in bodhi, the opposite happens with Jiao Jian as you look at the things you looked at before. The ordinary world, the world of sort of sensory outflows, starts to look really dark and dull. And it's really interesting. So there's a corresponding thing that's happening. What before looked like like Berkeley Buddhist Monastery just looked like this funny building on the corner, and you came in, there was these funny icons and whatnot, and you're going, whoa, I'm going back on, I'm gonna, watch my Netflix series or the World Cup or something. As you start to cultivate, the World Cup looks like a plastic cup. And the Netflix series looks like dry wax. And actually, even if it's color, it seems like black and white. It turns dark, it turns uninspirational. You come back into the monastery, especially if you send a 7-day retreat or something, and suddenly the ambient atmosphere looks radiant. Almost looks like your original home. And you're thinking, what's going on here? They did not do a makeup job. They did not do a makeover of the monastery. The light you returned allows you to see differently. I want to stress this is really important because people who cultivate with the idea they're going to see something special actually dull their light. Because the wanting to see or get something special outflows your original light. But by returning the light, quite naturally, you start to see in a different way, even though you didn't intend it to be that way. So I don't present this scene as something that you would hanker after. It's just described as an automatic and natural development that comes from returning the light to illumine within. Does this make sense? Okay. I didn't say anything about the verses yet, but I wanted to frame this in a very important way because otherwise this text seems like it's describing far out states regarding lights and appearances of Buddhas. But you have to understand that even this verse, because I will say, we can say Jin, and we can say one. What's the hearing? One with tone. One, 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 one. When Rusha will one. Is that second tone?
Rusha will one. I think third tone? Or Rusha will one 是第三声、第二声。二声, second tone.
One.
One.
Rusha will one. So Rusha will Jin. Thus I have seen. Rusha will one. The same thing applies. You're hearing again. You may come in, and this has happened to me. I can remember we were up on Mount Wutai, or I think it was Wutai, or was it the old, what's 9? So there's
Lo
Lewashan, Johashan. It might have been,
Restored.
and Putai.
Puto-san.
Pudoshan wasn't. It
Ome
wasn't
san.
Wutai. And it might have,
Ome.
maybe it was Wutai, maybe it was
Wutai is Manjushri.
Ome. It might have been
Ome.
Ome-shan. We were up on Ome-shan.
Ome.
And it was cold in the morning. You know, Ome-shan is really cold. It's a high mountain. And we were in the monastery chanting. And we were doing the same chanting that we do here. And it was the Shurangama mantra. And I was cold. But the chanting, there must have been about 80 or 90, 100 monks chanting. And they had pretty good voices. This was not like, you know, the gang that couldn't sing straight. They could sing. But they had a way of doing pentatonic chanting on the Shurangama that when they did that mantra, there were certain places where it rose. My spirit rose with it. I could feel it up the back, my tingling in my back. And I was like, that sound was so inspiring. I mean, it was just like powerfully inspiring, even though it was a mantra being chanted by monks on the top of a mountain. Now, I've gone to classical concerts, Mozart, Beethoven, Bach, and so forth. Yeah, it's cool. It's not bad. I'm sorry, it's good. But there's something that happens when you hear something of the spiritual nature of a mantra recited properly in the right atmosphere that can trigger this kind of response that the text is talking about here. A deep inspiration, and I would say a corresponding wish to return to the root of your own spiritual nature. It calls you back home. It's like a sound that calls you back home. Just like when you're out lost at sea or something, there's a light that comes from a lighthouse that shows you the way. In the Bay Area here, they've also realized that with fog, putting the lights out doesn't help. If you've got thick enough fog and you've got lights in the bay, boats will still crash. So what do? They close the bay and don't let boats in. No. They use what are called foghorns. And even in my house up in the hills here, on a foggy morning when everything's quiet, and all of a sudden they're, wee-oo, wee-oo. These are the foghorns. And some are beep, beep, wee-oo. And they're like markers to guide you into safe harbor. So the hearing here, thus I've heard, these mantras often are like foghorns calling us back, calling us home. You can see them that way. So again, if you cultivate, your channel of hearing begins to clear and open up, and you can hear it very clearly. It goes right to the depths of your soul, right to the depths of your heart. So I'm describing something that people think is magical and mystical, but actually it's actually very ordinary and accessible. The whole key is whether or not you're shining and polishing and refining yourself through Shila, Samadhi, Prajna. Okay, so let me say here, perhaps someone sees him sounding the lion's roar. His awesome brilliance has no peer, excelling all in the world. The power of his spiritual penetration is unequaled. Now I'm going to suggest something about where I'm at in my translation working process that I've come to now almost 50 years of working on this. And I still have to apologize. My language skills are very rudimentary, especially, Chinese. I'm okay with translation. But in any event, I have come to a sort of philosophy of translation, and that is basically in the target language, which is English, and this is in Chinese, we want to get as close as possible to the target language. So you have ASP, right? As soon as possible. I have ACAP, as close as possible. I've taken this acronym. To the source language. Now, what that means, it's funny because how can you get as close as possible to the Chinese with the English? One, you have to not just do the letter, but you have to get at the spirit. And at the same time, I'm getting to a point where I'm trying to keep commentary and footnoting to a minimum. so as to convey the meaning in the first shot, right in the text, if we can do that. Now, sometimes people do a very literal translation and then rely on footnotes and commentary to explain what that is. I'm suggesting we move beyond that, and in the first rendering of the target language, we get as close as possible to the original spirit. So this involves some steps. It means moving beyond what is called formal translation. Formal translation. A formal translation basically means word for word. Okay? So word for word. You just translate word for word. You just look at the Chinese dictionary, you look at and you take them in the sequence. If you move beyond that, you move to something called dynamic equivalence. So we're going from formal equivalence to dynamic equivalence is you not go word for word, but you go sense for sense. S-E-N-S-E. Spirit for spirit. So sometimes the word conveys the sense, but sometimes it doesn't. So you have to find the equivalent, the dynamic equivalent in English to capture that sense. For example, nirvana could be translated as extinction. But the sense of that is a liberation, a freedom, not an extinction per se. So when people translate extinction, then they have to have a lot of footnote and commentary what this means. The same thing with kung, meaning emptiness, or sunyata, literally emptiness. But when you translate a word for word, again, to an English Western ear, that sounds like a absence, a nihilism, a vacuum, a despair almost, forlorn. When in actuality, it means something quite different. How do we know this? It says, when Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara was cultivating the perfection of wisdom, he jiao jian, illuminated, that's interesting, there it is. He illuminated and saw the five skandhas as kung, and he sunk into bitter despair and went out and got drunk. No. He saw they're empty and he crossed beyond all suffering and difficulty. Hey, that's pretty cool. So kung must mean producing the end of suffering and the end of difficulty. It's an upper, it's not a downer. So that's why I'm saying if you go word for word, what we call formal translation, you are stuck with doing footnoting and commentary to make a Western English audience get the sense of it. But couldn't we try to get the sense of it directly per swap rather than that? Okay. And now, more recently, given my exposure with my teachers, and particularly Master Hua, who stressed that these sutras were living texts, they were living teachers, and they were actually medicine to counteract our illness of greed and anger and jealousy and foolishness and so forth, that these were living medicinal properties. And they were meant for us, not for Buddhas and Bodhisattvas or sages, but for ordinary people. They were, in a sense, therapeutic. Therapeutic. So, then I've introduced, this is my term, and I'll apologize if you don't like it, but that's what I'm working on. I've gone from formal equivalence to dynamic equivalence to what I call therapeutic equivalence. And by therapeutic equivalence, I mean something like curative. Do you know the word curative? C-U-R-A-T, curative, remedy, prescription, healing, health-inducing, salutary. All these words indicate the positive result of taking medicine to restore our health. That's what's meant by therapeutic. And so in this sense, the translation should convey beyond the formal. I mean, you use the formal as a start because that's important, but then you have to get to the dynamic. But finally, the result for the reader, for me or for you, has to be not just what does it mean, but how does it feel? How does it make me feel differently? Or how does it ask me to behave differently, to live differently after reading it? What is the therapeutic effect? You go to the doctor, he or she diagnoses your ailment, gives you the medicine. A week later you go back and what does the doctor say? 1, did you take the medicine? 2, how do you feel? How do you feel? Are your symptoms relieved and gone? So in the therapeutic equivalence, we have to be asking ourselves, both in studying this, translating, and teaching, is the effect of our words after they're said or spoken have a therapeutic effect on the audience? Now, don't get me wrong, therapeutic effect can sometimes be a little ouchy. I'm sorry. You know, I don't go to the doctor and get my vaccination and go, oh, that was so nice. Can you do that again? You know, and you watch little kids, they cry. But afterwards, they fight off disease and they feel better. Same thing with in Chinese medicine, they say good medicine is bitter to the taste. So by therapeutic, I don't mean it tastes good or feels good initially. What it does in the long term is restores health, makes you feel and be a better person. So this is very, very important. If these texts are in fact medicines, then one of the measures of our translation and our teaching has to be that it has this therapeutic effect on the listener, on the reader. This is very, very important. Because if you lecture it and you make people feel depressed and without hope and negative, and even to the point of wanting to slander the teachings, you have not used it fangbian, expediently. Now, it could be one of the differences that some of the medicine is meant for different illnesses and different people. And so it's not just how you translate it therapeutically, but who it's dispensed to. Certain teachings are meant for certain illnesses, if you will, or certain potentials. Other teachings are meant for different illnesses and different potentials, and if you prescribe the wrong medicine to the patient at the wrong time for the wrong thing, it can have what we call a counter effect or a side effect. Contraindication is the technical term. So there we have to be careful. So this is complex, but this is really important. Where does this idea come from? Excuse me, I didn't invent it. I didn't invent the idea of therapeutic or medicine. The use of therapeutic teaching actually has a Western philosopher who talks about this greatly, Pierre Hadot. And Pierre Hadot says essentially Western philosophy in its origins and in its initial thrust and meaning was to be meant to have inform and transform the individual. It was meant to come with spiritual exercises that transform the individual 180 degrees to something that was whole, good, insightful, and so forth. So he uses the word philosophy is meant to be therapeutic. It's not just to be meant to studied abstractly, it's meant to be taken as you would take food, it transforms. But you find this, and those of you who are interested, you find this allusion to Dharma's medicine in the Lotus Sutra. Okay, particularly trying to think what chapter in the Lotus. There's a number of chapters. I'll have to come back next week on what chapter I remember, but there's a particular chapter, I think it's chapter 16, that goes into it's like a parable. You have the parable of the burning house and the elder, and then you have the parable of the elder as a doctor, using Dharma as medicine to cure the poisons that the children have taken. So this is one place it appears. Anybody know any place else where you see medicine appear in text? Dharma is medicine. Teachings is medicine. Well, that's okay. Huh?
Dharma as a raft.
The raft is an equivalent you could use. It's a parallel. The Dharma is a raft to cross you over from danger to absence of danger. And so medicine, by extension, would be taking you from illness to health. It doesn't give you health. What it does is it removes the illness that allows health to return. This is really important. Okay, let me stress this again. The medicine doesn't give you health. It removes the poison or the impediment that's blocking your natural state of health. Okay, yeah. One of the other places it appears in the Mahayana tradition is the Vimalakirti Nirdesa Sutra. You'll see this metaphor of Dharma's medicine in there, and also in the Majjhima Nikaya, there is a middle. These are called the middle length discourses, and this is the Magandiya Sutta, and there's a long line in there. In the Vimalakirti, there's this line: Bodhisattvas are great kings of medicine, understanding all the sicknesses of the passions, trishna, the thirsts. They could apply the medicine of Dharma appropriately. This is from the Vimalakirti text. So, I hope you don't mind that I'm spending time talking about this, because it frames, as we go forward, how we get involved more with the translation. I'm trying to lay some ground. This is not definitive ground. I'm just sharing with you where I've come to, from what I can pick up from the teachers I've had and my experience with translation, but also my existential need at my age to be looking at things that resonate and make sense to me. I mean, I'm not reading for entertainment much anymore. I'm reading for something that's going to make sense of my life and where it's going in the short time it has left. So I'm, quote, a serious reader. And the only reason I'd be reading these texts is if they are addressing my deep human condition. I'm born, I'm getting old. As you have noticed, I get sick more often than usual, and soon I won't be here. You might have recordings of me, but I won't be here, okay? You say, where will you go? I'm not sure yet, but I won't be here. So that being a kind of fire that I can feel burning behind me puts an urgency into what I'm doing. Now, you guys are younger, and maybe you don't feel that urgency quite yet, but let me tell you, it's there anyhow. You're just not aware of it. Don't think because you're young that it couldn't end at any minute. Sorry, it doesn't work that way. In any way, so let me say this, and I'll throw this out for your consideration. Think about, we can talk about this further. I think there are markers for therapeutic Dharma. So when you have therapeutic equivalence, the affect or the marker that should indicate that it is good medicine, and I'm not making this up, you can find it in the text as well. One of the concepts I will introduce is that it should have the flavor or the taste of freedom. And in Pali, this is called vimutti. Vimutti. V-I-M-U-T-T-I. Means freedom, release, deliverance, liberation. What kind of freedom? It's not the freedom to do anything you want. In fact, it's sort of the freedom not to do everything you want. I'm sorry to phrase it that way. It's freedom from dukkha, literally. Freedom also from what's called the fabrications of the mind, which in Chinese we call da wang shan. Great false thinking, striking up false thinking. So it's freedom from confusion and the mad mind fabricating and imagining all sorts of things. And it's also freedom from dissatisfaction, from the suffering. And I won't go into the suffering of being apart from those you love, being close to what you hate, the suffering of never getting what you want, of aging, sickness, and death. These kinds of received sufferings. And it's also associated with reduction of klesha. So it's the freedom from outflows, the freedom from the chains of klesha, the greed, the anger, the craving, the arrogance, the doubt, the jealousy, the envy, the torpor. All of these psycho-emotional states are considered chains or bonds or outflows. And then the freedom is being liberated from that, not having that pressing on you anymore. So the other word that's used here, besides vimutti, I will introduce, and besides ashrava is the outflows or the klesha, so ashrava is the absence of those, is this idea sukha, S-U-K-H-A, and it has the opposite meaning of dukkha. And it's actually presented in the text as one of the markers or one of the returns, the rewards of cultivation. And dukkha, as you know, at least I was told by one of my Sanskrit friends, dukkha etymologically relates back to a chariot wheel that has a little glitch in it. So when it goes around, it goes bub bub, bub bub, bub bub. It turns off balance. And that's a great description. If you feel like your life is going bub bub, bub bub, bub, that's dukkha. Now it could be a relationship, it could be a job, it could be a lot of things. But if you got that uneven tire on your chariot, so to speak, that dissatisfaction, that's dukkha. Sukha actually means having a good axle. So it's the opposite. It's a tire that's smoothly running. So what this indicates is zizai in Chinese. Zizai, at ease, comfortable. And it's a comfort that doesn't come because you have comfortable things given to you. It's a comfort that comes from simply being centered in your own being and being exactly who and where you should be. And free from klesha, free from greed, free from animosity and so forth. And so sometimes sukha is called pleasure, but it's an authentic state of happiness that is lasting and not conditioned upon getting and losing. Now this is pretty cool. Texts talk about this. Confucius talks about a disciple, even in an alley with very poor food to eat, he was always happy and contented. And of course, the converse can be true. Someone who has a very nice place, a palace, and everything can still have dukkha. So sukha and dukkha is not associated with materiality, but it's a state of mind. It's a liberated state of mind. You are centered, and you stay in your center. Okay, so that being said, on translation, and then we'll probably have to stop here tonight and go into next. I might reverse, if you look at this, lines 3 and 4. So if you look at, I'm trying to look at the original here. So you see, perhaps someone sees him sounding the lion's roar, his awesome brilliance has no peer. Then I would put, again, the power of a spiritual penetration is unequaled, excelling all in the world. So I do that switch first, because that's what it's talking about. These spiritual penetrations excel. And again, what this means here is important because it's not making sort of a standalone claim that the Buddha is number one, but it's rather saying these powers or abilities are unexcelled. And I want to stress the next thing I would say is, instead of saying, what is it, all in the world? What does it read? Excelling all in the world, again, could seem like a boasting of everybody. But if we take it to be these spiritual powers and abilities are the ones that are unexcelled, then we should probably be saying something like surpassing all ordinary and mundane abilities. It's a contrast. That's why it's selling all in the world. It's selling all worldly and mundane abilities. In other words, those things that are sort of practical and commonplace, caught up with a limited purview. The abilities and powers or skills that have a scope or range of experience and thought that's very much concerned with getting ahead, winning, losing, my position at this, and so on and so forth. So, and people can have those abilities. They can be very good at business or archery or the various forms of archery, which is football, basketball, golf, tennis, blah, 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 blah. They can have abilities and powers even. And they can have political abilities and powers. But this is not, that's world, all in the world. So what this is talking about is abilities and powers that come from this self-cultivation and are not caught up with this mundane, ordinary, sort of limited scope and range of experience. Does that help? Make sense? Yeah. So I think here we have to make sure that it's not a boast, I'm number one above everybody else. It's saying the abilities and powers that came from this self-cultivation are not concerned with name and fame and gain and the ordinary things of power and status, but rather are tools and techniques now of great teaching and transformation, medicines, if you will. These abilities and powers, these medicines, surpass even the best medicines in the world because they're dealing with the ultimate illness of mortality, meaning, and our place in the universe. So that's why often I see Dharma masters, truly Dharma masters, as physicians, as Dharma doctors. And therefore, what they do based on their vows is to prescribe medicine for these illnesses. They are also professional. And as a professional doctor, they have to keep a certain distance from their patients. And this distance from their patients has a word. It's called compassion. It's very different than passion. So if you're not doing it professionally, you're outflowing. You're having burnout from your kindness and compassion because you're looking for something in return. But if you're professional, you can deeply empathize, prescribe the medicine, not wait to be asked and not wait around to be thanked. And not looking for, I got a lot of disciples, they're called patients. No. Good doctors don't want patients. They want the patient to get well and disappear. Get out of the way. So again, what I'm trying to do here is work on the translation a bit, change the third and fourth around, maybe add something on that line of saying surpassing all ordinary mundane abilities rather than all in the world. And then we can hope that this has a more direct first impact translation and starts approaching therapeutic equivalence. We're out of time tonight. I really apologize. I was going to do both verses and roll on, and I'm back to my normal, slow self. But I wanted to talk about penetrations, and that's going to take a little more time. So next week, if you can wait and be patient, we'll go into penetrations, because again, this is a standard translation of the Chinese, I believe is shentong, right? Literally, shun spirit, tong to penetrate. And there are variations of this. So maybe next week, some of you can look up the various translations of that in English that you will find for shentong, and we can talk about them. And then maybe we'll look into whether we'll keep penetrations or change it for something else and what it's talking about. Okay? And I'm guessing next week Jin Wei or Jin Chuanshi will be coming back to share the space up here to do some prescribing, diagnostics and prescribing. Anyhow, it's good to be back, really. I did get to Maine this summer, and I can share some of that later with you. And I was more careful this summer, so I didn't incur any injuries or near-death experiences. And some of you are going, oh, damn, I was hoping to hear another one. Well, not this summer. I was really quite cautious. So I can share more with you later. But it is good to be back, because being back, in the foundry, in the cauldron of the monastery is the most precious place in the world to be, really. So it's always good to come home. Anyhow. Those of you who might have questions online, I suppose you can pose them through Locke, who's doing the video streaming and whatnot. But unless are there some announcements to be made? And then we'll pick this up next week, go into penetrations on the second verse. And also I know that some of you are trying to translate now, form little groups of translation, and are sending me and maybe sending Jin Chuan as well the translations you're working on. I know somebody was doing translations of Worthy Leader in the verses, and there's a group that's doing translation work on this, and they send me that. So I will take a look at this and try to get back to you, but would encourage everybody to translate, to try to translate. And of course, the best form of translation is embodiment. So you don't even have to have the language. All you have to do is embody, and that's good translation. So maybe some announcements.
Yes, so we just finished today our 7 days of Amitabha session, and we keep going with our virtual Buddha Hall. We started since the pandemic, and you can find on the website different therapeutic methods and practices. We do morning ceremony, meditation, practice 3 steps, 1 bow. We also read 3 bowing journals and make some reflections around that. We have noon recitation, evening ceremony, and many different lectures. So tomorrow at 7:30, Monk Heng Sure will continue. He's lecturing on Avatamsaka Sutra as well. And this coming Sunday, the Master Jin Fosher will talk about, what is the title? Earth or Bodhisattva is because on this coming Sunday at the City of 10,000 Buddhas, we will start 7 days of Earth Store Sutra. So those of you who are interested, you can find a Zoom link, I guess, on the CTTB website, right? cttbusa.org. And also, we just start, I think, Marty, you are one of the first ones who start the fall semester here at BBM.
Yes, yeah.
And Stephen Tainer on Wednesday will start at September 15, and he will offer the classes meditation for beginners. You can look at on that if you wish. And anything else, Jinchuanshu? We have
Earth Store session CDB.
Yeah, I mentioned that.
So this is formally a class as part of the DRBU extension program, correct?
This one?
It is, as well as an SLTP
Yeah. I could
class.
do it as
So
well.
I'm guessing if you wanted to enroll in the extension program, you could, even though it's online or not.
Yes.
The extension currently isn't having like an online program that you sign up for and get a certificate for. People just join the classes. So
But they're going to classes through this.
yeah.
They're
Yes.
not going through this, their
Yeah.
feet. So maybe there's a way, Locke, do you know a way that somebody who wants to sort of sign up for the extension courses? Because I think Dharma Master Chur has one, I
Yes.
have one, Doug Powers has one. How could they do that?
I think you can go to Dharma Ram Buddhist extension, right, website, and you can fill out a very simple form. I guess it can be accepted, and as Marty says, you can join different classes. Master Heng Sure is lecturing on Shurangama Mantra on Tuesday, 4:15. VM Doug Power is also lecturing on Avatamsaka Sutra every Wednesday at 7:45, I guess. And I think Master Heng Sure also have Avatamsaka Sutra lecture as well. Alex, do you remember?
And there may be a Shastra class too.
And
Yeah, just you check
there's
out.
number of different classes.
Check out the
Yeah.
offerings. But if you, let me put it this way, the more you fill your life up with Dharma food, the less you're going to get sick on other things that you might eat. So one way to cultivate is not simply to hold the precepts and meditate, but it's to get the hearing and the seeing of the Dharma, because it's like a food. So the more that you can do this, it's healthy. It's really healthy. So some of these classes, even if you think, well, I don't understand, it's above my head, it's better to be sitting in a Dharma class that you don't understand than watching TV, which you do. If that makes sense to you. Okay. We do the transference in English?
Yeah.
Okay.
May every living beings, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace hands and hearts can find in giving unity. May our minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light dispel the darkness